So the new definition of carcass merit is going to look at the fat cover under the skin, the subcutaneous, work out what the optimum is for the meat quality, and the attributes of processing. We want to look at intramuscular fat and differentiate that from intermuscular fat. So intramuscular fat is lumps of fat between muscle, or sheets of fat between muscle, and intramuscular fat is that marbling inside, the one that gives us better eating qualities. We want to look at the shape of the animal. The muscle shape is what we call muscularity, and we know that sort of blocky shape which people often associate with a texel. We can quantify that. At the moment we just measure weight, and a weight is just a volume by another name. You don't know whether it's a long, thin weight or a short, blocky weight, so we want to look at shape. We want to tie these things to meat yield and meat quality. The key thing about this project is aligning them with commercial carcass assessment systems, because those systems are evolving and they're starting to bring in and talk about attributes of both eating quality and processing yield and other attributes that make that a better product for them selling in the marketplace. So we want to better characterise the carcass than we currently do. So in terms of carcass shape and muscularity, we're all familiar with images like this one, where you see a carcass that's a much superior shape on the left. And in this particular case, if I get rid of the two that are in the middle and just look at the extremes, you can see the carcass on the left has this so-called desirable attributes. Why do you think that's a better one? Because the industry thinks the one on the left's better. What's better about it? Why is it better? Let's say I could tell you they were both 18 kilogram carcasses and they both produced 14 kilograms of meat. Is there any other attribute of shape that's...
The shape of the muscle.
Why is that better?
Fits around the plate.
Yeah, you don't need such a big plate to put it on.
I'm saying the shape of the muscle is different, but it's got the same amount of muscle.
Yeah, well, it may be to do with either cooking qualities, when the carcass sets. Is it an indicator of maturity and therefore the level of intramuscular fat or tenderness, inherent tenderness in the meat? There may be attributes of shape or associations with it that shape in itself may not be important, but it may tell us other attributes of quality. If the meat company says, no, shape's really important because I want to produce shops that are all perfectly round, then shape is important. But it's simply at the moment, when you go and buy loins in the supermarket, you get some nice loins and you get some flat loins. And I personally, I don't know whether I'm indoctrinated, but I like the plump ones, not the flat ones. So, CT scans. With this project, we're going to do ultrasound on farm like you currently do. We're going to CT scan those live animals. They're then going to be slaughtered, and the carcasses will be CT scanned from head to toe. So they've been CT scanned before slaughter at some reference points, and then we'll completely CT scan the carcass afterwards. As well as that, the carcass will then be assessed by the meat company's assessment system and boned out. So we're going to have a data set for different meat companies where we can calibrate back to the same point, which is the CT carcass definition of what carcass merit is. So let's look at what we can do with CT scans. When we CT scan the carcass from top to toe, we can add all those images up together and then look at different things. And in this particular case, I've put all the bones together so you can see the carcass hanging there. I can layer on top of that the muscle, and I can put on top of that the fat. And because there's intramuscular fat between muscles, you can't see that, but there's fat on the surface and there's fat inside. What we can then do is say, if the meat company cuts at this point on the skeleton, let's look at the composition and shape of this cut versus that cut. We've got the ability to go back if the meat company changes its calibration system and say we can dissect the carcass in a different way, or we can define the carcass merit in a different way from this comprehensive scanning, CT scanning of the carcass, and the ability to separate it into fat, muscle and bone. But going on to some of the other aspects, if we look at this particular image here, I'm now looking at the CT scans going from the neck all the way down the animal. We're just going to the shoulder there. A bit further, that's the arm bone, the humerus. I'm just going to go back to the shoulder blade. There's the beginning of the shoulder blade, and that's a good part of the blade to look at, where this is the blade, and that's the ridge on the top of the blade that you see if you bone out a shoulder. And we'll just go to the back of the shoulder blade, and you'll see that little cartilaginous line that's at the back of the shoulder blade. You can see it best on the left here. that line there is that little thin bit of cartilage on the back of the shoulder blade when you're boning out a leg or you've cooked a shoulder. You can see here the fat. The fat is dark grey because it's less dense than the muscle, which is this grey, and the bone, the most dense, is the white. The black is air. So you can see layers of fat in here. That's the intermuscular fat. I'm wanting you to look to see if you can see grey seams in these muscles, because that's the intramuscular fat, sorry, the marbling fat. And as we go down the animal, we're coming down here into the chest. You can see the ribs coming off the spine and coming down the side as they go forward. Then we're just about to get, that's the first vertebra of the lumbar region, which doesn't have a rib associated with it. So this is the loin, the front of the loin, that muscle there. Going back a bit further, you can see some, I'll try and get one where there's some good seams of fat. Well, it's okay, but you can see a distinct seams of fat here. This is marbling fat in that particular image. Then you go right back and we get into the pelvis, which is just coming up about now. There's the bone that holds your trousers up. And you go a bit further back, we should be getting to the hip joint about now. There's the hip joint where the femur joins into the socket on your hips. Go a bit further back, we'll go into the meat of the main cross-section of the leg. And if you look on the right-hand side there, that's that little lymph node that's in the middle of the leg. You know how there's a thing about the size of a walnut of fat in the middle of a leg when you're carving it? And in the middle there's a thing about a bit bigger than a pea. It's a sort of grey, cheesy looking thing. That's called a lymph node. So what we can do here is get the muscle, fat and bone and look at what it is. But we want to look at things more than just the volume. We want to look at the average density of the muscle. We think that's where we're going to get the subcutaneous fat. We want to look at the shape and see how valuable it is. So we'll look at 4 reference slices in the live animal: shoulder, chest, loin and hind leg. And I'm going to look at 2 sheep here. Here's the fatter sheep that you've just been looking at, these, and then I've got the same images from a leaner sheep, which is here. So I'll just go backwards and forwards between them, and you can see the lines of layers of fat between the muscles are much more distinct in the fat sheep than the lean sheep. And you can also see some seams of fat, and the bottom left image is probably best, in that loin muscle. You can see them on that fat sheep, and you don't see them on the lean sheep. So it's these sorts of things we can pick up from the image. We also, if we look at that in an enlarged sense, here, and I've got the fat sheep on the left and the lean one on the right, you can quite distinctly see lines of fat here and here that you don't see as distinctly at all in this lean sheep. But even so, there's a hint of them. I don't know whether it's my imagination, I've been looking at these too long, but there's a hint of a line there and there which correspond to some of these. What we're trying to do is characterise the amount of fat in the muscle there. So in terms of measuring muscle shape, if we look at a stylised shape here, and what I've done is I've taken that muscle and I've distorted it so it's got the same volume but different lengths. And so in order to have the same volume, and I shorten it, it has to be fatter, and if I lengthen it, it's got to be thinner. So all shape is a ratio of some sort of dimension. And what we're going to have here is we look at diameter, length and volume. These all have the same volume. And you just look at a ratio, diameter to length. The bigger number is the one on the left. It's got a blockier shape. So that index of diameter to length, the 0.43, is a blockier shape than the 0.2. We could do it on volume, and we could say that the 0.88 is a higher number than the 0.18, which is a measure of blockiness. And that's all we can do with shape. So let's calibrate that with what we've just looked at, the 4 images in the carcass here. If we look at the fat sheep and the lean sheep, and then we say, let's look at shape of muscles that we can see in those cross sections. And if you think about it, this particular image is exactly what the ultrasound scanner is doing. In the loin or the back of just behind the ribs, they're looking at width and depth there with ultrasound. With CT, we're just doing it in more regions. And we're also looking at the width relative to the length of the leg. Strictly speaking, it's not the length, it's sort of the depth relative to the width of the leg. And we then put some numbers on those ratios, and we would say the upper sheep's got values of these, the lower sheep's got value of these, and the upper sheep relative to the lower sheep has got 43% rounder eye muscle in the shoulder. It's about 7% in the chest, 23% in the loin, maybe 11% better shape in the leg. I haven't positioned these images very precisely because I had to make them quite small, and if I was going to measure shape, I'd look at them on a big screen. Shape, by definition, is not size. Size is important for value, but if you've got two things of the same size, one can have a better shape. We're trying to characterize shape, and there may be some, I've looked at those sort of individual muscles. It may be as simple as the best measure is simply something like muscle volume over the length of the carcass. You could say live weight of the animal over the length of the animal. Length of an animal is notoriously difficult to measure in a live animal in a pen. But it might be something like you could look at leg volume, muscle volume relative to leg length as a measure of blockiness. So the next steps, we want feedback from you as practicing breeders and what you assess when you're assessing traits like this, muscularity, carcass merit. What is it you're assessing in the live animal, and where are you assessing it? So we can get our system aligned with and measuring in similar parts of the carcass. And when it comes to the meat company, we want to say, what are your indicators of superior yield and meat quality so that we can best tie them to some of these measurements we're making, and therefore we're joining up with our CT of the carcass, what's happening on farm, with what's being valued by the meat company. That's the aim.